No matter who you are, no matter what your favorite game is, it's just a fair statistical assertion for me to claim that your favorite game is going to become obsolete. No matter how much people might say that a game is great at a certain time, its moment will pass. Consider this context, that every single game is going to be played via a subjective experience. And while it's definitely true that a game is the same now as it was 20 or 30 years ago in terms of gameplay, outside of its original context, it won't be the same. And a lot of that shine wears away. I want to make an argument, and I want you to cut me a break as I do it, because I'm not writing a script for this. This is just off the top of my head. It's an idea that I've been holding on to for a long time, and it breaks down into two parts. And my central argument is that games can never be as good as they were. Your mileage may vary. Everybody's childhood or peak period of game appreciation is going to vary. I want you to come back with me to when I was less than a dozen years old, and I want to tell you about what it was like to first experience the magic of video games. If I were to go all the way back, my earliest memories were of this, Space Invaders, the first legitimately good video game that I ever played. Atari 2600. I still, to this day, love this game. I don't think it's the best version. In my opinion, my favorite way to play Space Invaders is on the Nintendo 64. Incredibly underrated game. Get yourself a copy of it, it's dirt cheap. The Atari wasn't ours. I wasn't allowed to have one. My uncle let us borrow it, and it was magical. Look at the artwork. There's no question about it that Atari first wrote onto my brain the appreciation for box art. It peaked. Box art peaked with the Atari. I didn't like much about the 2600, but you have to give it its art credit. The designs were just completely over the top and magical, and the games were nothing like anything depicted on the front. But the Atari wasn't the significant thing that did it to me. It wasn't the thing that made me love games. This was. Sorry to sound so cliche, it's going to be the same Mario Zelda story everybody else my age has, but this is the one that did it to me. I had seen over at my cousin's house, they were playing this, and I was completely transfixed, because I was lucky enough, well, they were nice enough to let me watch them play. Right then and there, something in me snapped. I had found this magical medium. Again, I'll apologize for sounding cliche. Most people my age have had a similar experience with this. It was as though I was watching the convergence of art and science in this new way of expressing through media some adventure, some decision-making process that was just not available any other way. I knew from that moment that it would grow. Even when other people didn't think so, or when they thought the game industry was going to die again and again and it was over, I still held in my head this idealistic vision of, well, ultimately virtual reality. And I lived to see it. Ironically enough, I don't own a VR. I guess the wait, it just took too long. And when I did finally play Skyrim in VR, it kind of made me nauseous. This brings me to my first point. Magic and the imagination context. I can remember the first time I played Super Mario Bros. And it was magical. I can remember the first time I saw Super Mario Bros. 2, and it was magical. Again, a friend's cousin this time was nice enough to let my friend and I watch him play. And the first time I played Super Mario Bros. 3, It was magical. A friend brought it over. This one was 1988, I believe, if I remember correctly. So the earlier parts in the story all took place before this. Significant backstory. Super Mario 3, my friend promised he'd bring it over to play, but the weekend that he was supposed to come over, a bully kept it, and we walked all the way to his house to ask for him back, for the game back, and he wouldn't give it to my friend. And so he came out crying and swearing the whole way home. It was really sad. But these weren't even the most magical. The most magical of all would have been The Legend of Zelda. This game reigns supreme in terms of its magic. Nothing else even came close for me. And I say that without irony, as though I didn't really remember seeing Sonic the Hedgehog for the first time. My cousin had it. He had a Genesis, and he came up from Georgia, and he let me play it a little bit, to his credit. And again, this experience of successive exposure to magical feelings. That's what video games did. You have to understand the time period. It was just again and again, beginning in the late 80s, that the medium reinvented itself with a new, remarkable improvement. And it's not like today. The improvements you could really see, they were dramatic. One couldn't help but become transfixed by the optimism of this new wondrous medium's outrageous growth. Now, to this day, games still hold some of that magic for me. New games a little bit, older games sometimes. I don't know. It's a rare combination, and it's a scratch that we continuously try to itch, isn't it? And when we finally figure out the formula for preserving, maximizing, and re-experiencing nostalgic sentiment, you put that in a bottle and you won't have to pay hundreds of dollars for a rare game. Should I go through my experience? No. It will take me forever. I mean, in Rayman, the first time that you go through those musical boards, or figuring out that in Super Metroid that you can do that spin move to gain height, or the first time you see the Halo, or Portal 2, my goodness, the wonder of it. Oblivion, the world, its beauty. I can just go through any of these and just point to the ways in which these games have amazed me over the years. Every single generation had its masterpieces. Every single medium. Every single popular franchise has its moments. And the games all have their caveats. When you finally get to the hoverboard levels in Battletoads, the fun is over. And you can end most games of Tecmo Bowl by throwing that Hail Mary 100-yard pass, right? But they have their moods, too. The mood of Castlevania. It has a mood. And it's just hard to experience that mood without this medium. So let me return to my central argument here. It is all about mood. Why can we no longer recreate that feeling, that mood that Castlevania created for me as a child? Why can we no longer do that with new games? Maybe we can to some extent, but I'm arguing that we can't do it to the same degree for two reasons. Sorry, my camera died. Reason number one, magic, the imagination context. Let's go way back. And yes, that is one of those coveted KV model televisions that you're looking at. And that is part of the problem. Let me explain. I've already hinted at the reality that it's impossible for you, if you didn't already do this, it's impossible for you to go back and re-experience the eerie feeling of Castlevania through my 10-year-old eyes and mind. If you didn't have that context, you can't have it now. And so you might want to experience it for yourself, and you think that you can do it objectively by playing it on an emulator. And you're missing the point if you do. Okay, so you like vintage games, and you figure, well, I'll be diligent and I'll get the original hardware and I'll play it exactly as they did in the 80s, but you aren't in the 80s when you play it, and there's something else about it that you have to understand. I can't express this to you forcefully enough. Super Mario Brothers was not meant to be played on a television like that. It was meant to be played on a crappy CRT, because that's what we had at the time. Why does this matter? Trust me, it does. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you hook up these early consoles? Okay, well, first let me apologize for the lighting. We're in a closet here. This is the Atari 2600, and this was the thing you were trying to hook up. There would be a power wire sticking out of the back there, and usually out of this slot, a cable like this would be sticking out. Take a close look. And this needed to send a video signal to your television. But there's no plug like this on your television. The only thing that you were likely to see on your television were two screws that sort of looked like this. Yes, you would hook up your Atari with a flathead screwdriver. And so again, this cable would be sticking out of the back of your Atari, and you would have to get one of these devices for it to plug into, and then this would screw to your television. If your television was fancy enough to have one of those nubs on it, like this, for coaxial cable, then you could do this, and then plug this gizmo directly into that. And that brings us to the NES, the Nintendo, which was a paragon of simplicity. Now, of course, you could just use those audio-video jacks there if you had those cables, but most of us kids did not. And so we were just stuck with the RF switch adapter thing right there, just like an Atari. We would plug this into that, connected to this gray box, which plugged into the cable thing on the back of your television. And just so that your parents wouldn't complain, you could still plug in the antenna or the cable right to the back of it so that the signal wasn't interrupted. Your parents would probably still complain, because my dad swore that this thing was destroying the Zenith television, even though there's no basis in reality for that claim. Wait, I take that back. Static images could, in theory, eventually affect a CRT television, but it takes forever, and you're not going to play Nintendo that much. Sometimes back then you might see at a video arcade, or maybe at a Pizza Hut, they had those flat-top Pac-Man games that you could still eat your pizza on and play at the same time. And it was a CRT television inside of it. And Pac-Man would play on it endlessly for thousands of hours, and eventually it would burn the image in. But for your home console, like your Nintendo or your Atari, it was not likely to ever happen. Ironically, from his favorite news program, the bottom of the screen, it has those logos. Yeah, that burned into his television. I'm a bit off track. My point here has to do with the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and how pixelated it looked. Sprites. Or rather, how pixelated they didn't look. Look how crisp and sharp these pixels are. You can see the individual pixels. That is not how the experience is when you're playing Nintendo. Watch what happens. This is the experience of playing Nintendo. Notice that the sprites now look more realistic than they do up close. They're not sharp and crisp. They're blurry. Let me show you in real life. Right now you're looking at a Samsung LCD television. Never mind the visual artifacts, the point is that we're looking at a modern television and using an emulator. Of course, this is just coming to you through a camera lens. I'm not even using any capture software. But pay close attention to just how sharp it is. This is not what Nintendo looks like on a CRT. Okay, now we're down here in the basement. to look at a considerably older television. This is the sort of thing that the lucky kids in the 80s had in their bedroom. I did not. An old television like this works so convincingly based on a really simple assumption. That assumption is blurriness. It takes red, green, and blue pixels and blurs them together so that at a distance, it's really effective. Any crispness shatters the illusion. Please try not to misinterpret what I'm saying here. I am not arguing for a degraded signal. In fact, this setup in here is totally less than ideal because, take a look. I'm using the RF switch and it's hooked into that cable coax thing only because there are no audio video jacks on this old TV. This does not make a better setup, it's a worse setup. The best way to hook up an NES is by using the red and yellow RCA jacks. But even with this subpar arrangement, we can still capture the essence of the experience better than by using an emulator. It's just extremely janky without the RCA jacks. This part of my argument might not be that convincing. You kind of have to do it in person for yourself. It's too hard to capture on video. But just trust me when I make the claim that from here, you just don't make out the details of Mario, and your imagination fills in all the dotted lines. And so, as it turns out, when we get to peek behind the curtain, it doesn't look as magical. The CRT helped preserve that illusion. And now for the scripted part. Let's close this first part of my argument off. I'll call this part Magic, the Imagination Context. And so let me summarize my argument thus far. New games are stunningly complex sensory experiences that leave less room for artistic interpretation outside of their own narrative design. Further, the modern lack of game scarcity, or stated another way, the hypersaturation of game media, reduces the urgency and thus the value of the game experience. The overall result is less time in the cherished now of gameplay, and that's replaced instead with the antsy crawl of the incessant desire to see what else there is. What comes next? What can you do better? We're not being in the moment in our games. Okay, so we can't re-experience the old contexts. We can't go back. So why can't we just make new contexts? Video games as a medium are still progressing. We're on an exponentially increasing technological curve, right? So why can't we just go forward? We sort of can, but we also have to close the door behind us. It's not just that we were children. It's also that video games as a medium were in their own childhood. We can't return to see the medium through that context ever again. We keep trying, we struggle to re-experience Mario and Zelda and Tetris and 007 and you name it, and the franchise has tried itself again and again and again. We are repackaging old ideas again and again and again because we want to get, again, that mood. We want to re-experience the mood. But somehow it's just not scratching the itch. And so we move it up. We increase the scale. We dial up the complexity on the games that we play. And it sort of does it. But most games are risk-averse. They're formulaic. If something works, we repeat the pattern. Some games are weird. They take risks. These risks may or may not pay off. Every once in a while, you get something that's just a weird gem. But most of the time, originality is punished. And even games that are super solid in lots of ways, if they don't stick to the formula, they're forgotten. Everything's derivative. Even original properties. Never mind that this has like 24 sequels. It's Kyle Reese. Did you ever play 720? The game sucks. It's a port of an arcade game that was probably better in the arcade, but I still probably didn't play it as a kid, even in the arcade, more than once or twice. But you gotta hand it to the game. Even though the game sucks on NES, at least it tried something different. It was new. It created a mood. And mood is the result of a game being bigger than the sum of its parts. There's something missing. And here we are, we've arrived at the second part of my argument. We can't go back. Let's call this part of the problem the gamble. Mass appeal. Everything is an established franchise. Mortal Kombat, The Matrix, Spider-Man, Batman, The Thing. Every time somebody takes a gamble, it's punished. In the corporate world, better safe than sorry. Let's stick with an established franchise. We don't want to try something new because it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, but quirk is risky. Personality doesn't always pay off in this world. We're kind of after bland. Mass appeal. Get ready to throw stuff at me. Breath of the Wild was the most beautiful game I've ever seen. No question about it. But it was a flawed masterpiece. It was bland. In some ways, it does everything that the original did. Take a look. At its core, Breath of the Wild was fundamentally the same thing. It captured exploration better than any other attempt in the Zelda franchise. But what went wrong? They dumbed it down. They made it too easy. They replaced those excruciating dungeons with shrines, which are feel-good, easy-to-solve puzzles made for, well, to put it not too gently, people of average cleverness. So much for the challenge of endless adventure. The beauty and intrigue of Breath of the Wild was not enough to sustain me. It lacked quirk. It lacked originality. And it just didn't have the personality that would draw me in to make me believe I was having a unique experience. Goodness, it hurts me to say it because I've never loved and hated a game so much in my life. Let's just face it, games now can be technically stunning. They're technological marvels. But look into those big, dead eyes. And notice how empty it is. In some ways, Lucky is just completely devoid of any personality, because there's just no risk in him. My argument is that magic and mystery are just harder to capture now in new games. There's a new priority: safety. The new absence of quirk in games is made for safety's sake. Games are big investments now, and corporate financiers are just not going to be willing to take the gamble. Even if they are willing, it might not be possible for another reason. Maybe we just don't know how to capture magic and mystery. It could be bottled lightning, and there are too many variables involved, and it's just beyond the scope of the imagination of one person or one creator. In that sense, when we have a collection of people working on a game, the magic and mystery might be an emergent property of the collaborative effort. It just might be bigger than one person's design. And the corporate aversion to risk sure isn't going to help us get to quirk anytime soon. Before we close, I'd like to make the point, I want you to understand that I'm not arguing that games can never be good again. What I'm arguing is that we should appreciate what qualities we value when we find them now, because we can never re-experience that. No matter how much we try to capture it, it just squeezes through our fingers as we try. Stay in the now and enjoy what you find value in. And you can trust that no matter what now you're in, that future innovators, indie developers, brilliant minds, they are out there and they are trying and they succeed. And so there will be new things that are magical, new things to appreciate, new things to find value in. And speaking of which, I hope you found value in this video. I appreciate your time. See you on the next topic.